You need to know your place.
Know your place. The cold water hit Ariel Monroe's face before she could finish her sentence. It soaked her blouse, ran down her hair, and dripped onto the living room floor while laughter filled the room. Her husband leaned comfortably beside his rich mistress, watching the humiliation like it was entertainment. Across from them, his mother calmly placed the empty glass back on the table, completely satisfied with what she had done. That night, Ariel walked out of the house in tears with a small suitcase in her hand. What none of them knew was that just a few hours earlier, she had secured a $50 billion deal that would change her life forever. Hello fam, welcome to True Love Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones. Thank you as you do so. Now relax, let's dive into the story. Ariel Monroe had always believed that love meant loyalty, patience, and sacrifice. For years, she carried those beliefs like sacred vows, even when life kept proving that she was the only one honoring them. At 32, Ariel was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she walked into a room. Not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself with quiet elegance. Her dark skin glowed like polished bronze, and her posture was always straight, confident, and composed. That particular Monday morning began like every other. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the modest townhouse she shared with her husband and his mother. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of a coffee machine brewing in the kitchen. Ariel stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the sleeve of her lilac blazer, which hugged her slender figure perfectly. Underneath it, she wore a cream blouse tucked neatly into charcoal-tailored trousers, finished with a pair of silver-pointed heels that added both elegance and authority to her appearance. She lightly applied lip gloss, studying her reflection for a moment before giving a small, determined nod. Across the room, her husband Darius Monroe was still sprawled across the bed, snoring softly under the covers. Darius had always been handsome. Tall, broad-shouldered, with smooth dark skin and a charming smile that once made Ariel's heart skip whenever he walked into a room. When they met years ago, he had dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, talking endlessly about business ideas and luxury lifestyles he promised they would build together. Ariel believed in him completely. She had worked long hours, supported him financially when necessary, and defended him whenever people questioned his ambition. But somewhere along the way, Darius stopped trying. While Ariel climbed the corporate ladder with relentless discipline, Darius discovered something much easier: wealthy women who enjoyed the company of a charming man who looked good on their arm. What started as harmless flirting at upscale lounges soon became a lifestyle. Expensive watches appeared on his wrist, designer jackets filled the closet, and there was always some new business connection who paid for his dinners, trips, and parties. Ariel knew. The rumors had reached her months ago. Some of her own co-workers had even seen Darius at luxury events with women whose bank accounts dwarfed their own. Every time she confronted him, he brushed it off with laughter or vague excuses. "It's networking," he would say casually. "You wouldn't understand how business works." But the most painful part of the situation was not Darius. It was his mother. Loretta Monroe had moved into their home shortly after the wedding. At first, Ariel had welcomed her warmly, hoping to build a respectful relationship with the woman who raised the man she loved. Instead, Loretta quickly made it clear that she saw Ariel as little more than a convenient provider. Loretta was a woman in her late 50s who carried herself with loud confidence and sharp opinions. That morning she sat comfortably in the living room. Her nails were painted a glossy crimson, and she scrolled lazily through her phone while sipping coffee. When Ariel stepped into the room, Loretta barely looked up. "You leaving already?" she asked with mild annoyance. "I have an early meeting today," Ariel replied calmly, picking up her work bag from the table. Loretta scoffed lightly. "Always running to that office. A married woman should focus more on her home." Ariel paused but said nothing. She had learned that responding usually led nowhere good. Loretta continued, her voice dripping with casual criticism. "Darius was out late again last night. Said he had dinner with a client. Probably one of those rich ladies who appreciate him." The comment was deliberate. Ariel slowly exhaled, forcing herself to remain composed. "Loretta," she said carefully, "I don't think encouraging that behavior helps anyone. Loretta finally lifted her eyes, studying Ariel with a look that mixed irritation and amusement. "Oh, please," she said dismissively. "Those women bring money and gifts. You should be thankful. Not many wives get husbands who attract wealthy connections." Ariel felt the familiar sting in her chest. For years she had tolerated comments like that, hoping things would improve if she remained patient. But sometimes the humiliation became too heavy to ignore. "He's my husband," she said quietly. "Not a social escort." Loretta's expression hardened immediately. She set her coffee cup down and stood up slowly, walking toward the kitchen counter. For a brief moment Ariel thought the conversation was over. Instead, Loretta picked up a glass, filled it halfway with water, and turned back toward her. "You talk too much for someone who forgets her position," Loretta said coldly. Before Ariel could react, the water flew across her face. The sudden splash soaked the collar of her blouse and dotted her blazer with dark stains. Cold droplets ran down her cheeks and neck as she stood frozen in place. Loretta placed the empty glass back on the counter, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Next time," she said firmly, "know your place in this house." For several seconds the room remained silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Ariel slowly wiped the water from her face with the back of her hand. Her heart pounded, but she refused to cry. Showing tears would only give Loretta satisfaction. Instead, she straightened her blazer, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. Behind her, Loretta called out casually, "Don't forget to pick up groceries after work." Ariel stepped outside into the cool morning air, closing the door gently behind her. The quiet street felt like a different world compared to the tension inside that house. As she walked toward her car, she allowed herself one small moment to breathe. Her life had not turned out the way she imagined. The marriage she fought so hard to protect had become something heavy and exhausting. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside as she started the engine. Work was the one place where her efforts mattered. At Apex Dominion Holdings, Ariel Monroe was respected, admired, and valued. Over the past 7 years, she had risen through the ranks with remarkable speed, building a reputation as one of the company's most brilliant strategists. Her colleagues trusted her judgment on billion-dollar negotiations, and senior executives often relied on her to close the deals others could not. What Ariel didn't realize as she drove toward the towering glass building downtown was that the meeting scheduled for that morning would change everything. Within a few hours, she would secure the largest deal in the company's history, a deal worth $50 billion. And the woman who left her house that morning feeling small, humiliated, and invisible would soon become someone the entire business world could not ignore. But back at the Monroe house, Darius and Loretta had no idea that the quiet woman they constantly disrespected was only hours away from stepping into a life of power, wealth, and independence. And when that moment finally arrived, the Ariel who returned home would never be the same woman they thought they controlled. By the time Ariel Monroe arrived at the headquarters of Apex Dominion Holdings, the city was fully awake. Downtown Atlanta pulsed with the usual rush of morning traffic, sleek cars gliding past towering glass buildings that reflected the golden sunlight. Employees hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups in hand, but inside the massive steel and glass structure that housed Apex Dominion, the atmosphere carried a different kind of energy, one that revolved around ambition, power, and billion-dollar decisions. Ariel parked her car in the executive garage and stepped out with calm confidence. The earlier humiliation at home still lingered faintly in her mind, but she had long mastered the ability to separate her personal struggles from her professional life. In the corporate world, she was not the quiet woman constantly belittled by her husband and mother-in-law. Here, she was known as one of the sharpest strategic minds in the company. As she walked through the revolving glass doors, the polished marble lobby reflected the early morning light. The receptionist greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe." Ariel returned the smile politely. "Good morning, Kayla." Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she crossed the lobby. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed. Some greeted her directly, others simply watched with admiration. Ariel had built a reputation that few in the building could match. She was known for her relentless work ethic, her calm negotiation style, and her ability to see opportunities where others saw impossible risks. The elevator ride to the 26th floor was quiet. As the doors opened, the atmosphere shifted instantly from calm professionalism to intense anticipation. Her assistant, Malik Davenport, was already waiting near her office door with a tablet in his hand. Malik was a tall, energetic man in his late 20s with neatly trimmed facial hair and an easygoing personality. Today, however, his usual relaxed demeanor had been replaced by nervous excitement. "There you are," he said quickly as she approached. The board members arrived early. "They're already in the conference room." Ariel paused briefly. "All of them?" Malik nodded. "Every single one. Even the CEO." That was unusual. The meeting scheduled for that morning involved the final negotiations for an international infrastructure project, a massive collaboration between Apex Dominion and several foreign investment groups. The numbers had been enormous from the beginning, but the deal had faced several complicated obstacles. For months, Ariel had been leading the negotiation team, working late nights reviewing contracts, restructuring financial projections, and managing delicate conversations between powerful stakeholders who did not always trust one another. The success of the project rested heavily on her shoulders. Malik lowered his voice slightly. "They're expecting you to present the final agreement." Ariel gave a small nod. "All right." She stepped into her office briefly, placing her bag on the desk and reviewing the documents one last time on her tablet. The numbers were still staggering even after weeks of preparation. $50 billion. If the agreement was approved today, it would become the largest deal Apex Dominion had ever secured. She took a slow breath, straightened her blazer, and walked toward the conference room. Inside, the long glass table was already surrounded by executives. Some were quietly reviewing documents while others spoke in low voices. At the head of the table sat Gerald Whitmore, the company's CEO, a seasoned businessman whose calm demeanor often hid a razor-sharp mind. As Ariel entered, several heads turned. Whitmore smiled slightly. "Ah, Ms. Monroe. We were waiting for you." Ariel took her seat near the center of the table, connecting her tablet to the large display screen behind her. The room fell silent. She stood, her posture straight and composed. "Good morning, everyone," she began smoothly. "Over the past 8 months, our team has worked with international partners to finalize the Atlantic Urban Development Initiative. Today, I'm presenting the completed agreement." The screen illuminated behind her, revealing detailed charts, projections, and contract summaries. For the next 40 minutes, Ariel guided the executives through every aspect of the deal. Her voice remained steady and confident as she explained the financial structures, investment distribution, long-term revenue forecasts, and risk management strategies. Even the most skeptical board members listened carefully. At one point, a senior executive leaned forward. "And the projected return?" Ariel tapped the screen, revealing the final projection. "The combined infrastructure network will generate an estimated return exceeding $200 billion over the next 15 years. Murmurs spread across the room. Whitmore's eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed. Ariel continued calmly. "Our share of the partnership secures long-term revenue streams across transportation, logistics, and commercial development. The total value of the finalized agreement stands at $50 billion. The room became completely silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Whitmore slowly leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, "that is extraordinary." One of the board members laughed in disbelief. "This will put us years ahead of our competitors." Another added, "If this closes today, it changes the entire industry." Whitmore stood up. "Let's vote." The board members exchanged brief glances before raising their hands one by one. The decision was unanimous. The deal was approved. For a second, Ariel simply stood there, processing what had just happened. Months of pressure, sleepless nights, and relentless negotiations had finally paid off. Then the room erupted. Applause filled the conference room as executives stood from their chairs. Several people approached her immediately, congratulating her enthusiastically. Whitmore walked over with a wide smile. "Ms. Monroe," he said, extending his hand, "you just secured the most significant contract in the history of Apex Dominion Holdings." Ariel shook his hand, still slightly overwhelmed. "You should be very proud," he continued. Another executive added jokingly, I hope the company prepared a big enough bonus for this one. Whitmore chuckled. Actually, that brings us to another announcement. The room gradually quieted again. Whitmore looked directly at Ariel. As many of you know, Ms. Monroe has led some of our most successful negotiations over the past several years. Today's achievement makes it clear that her leadership belongs at the highest level of this company. He paused briefly. Effective immediately, Ariel Monroe is being promoted to Executive Director of Global Strategy. The applause returned even louder than before. Malik, standing near the door, nearly dropped his tablet in excitement. But the surprises weren't over. Whitmore continued. In addition to the executive position, Ms. Monroe will receive an equity share tied directly to the Atlantic Initiative. A few executives exchanged impressed glances. They understood exactly what that meant. The scale of the deal ensured that Ariel's personal financial share would be enormous. Whitmore smiled. Congratulations, Ms. Monroe. Welcome to the executive board. For the first time that morning, Ariel allowed herself a genuine smile. Her entire life had just changed. Not only had she earned one of the most powerful positions in the company, but the equity share tied to the project meant her financial status had skyrocketed overnight. The quiet, hard-working woman who left home that morning worrying about disrespect and humiliation was now entering a level of wealth and influence few people ever reached. After the meeting ended, co-workers surrounded her with excitement. Malik rushed over. Executive Director Monroe, wow. That sounds good. She laughed softly. I guess I'll have to get used to it. You deserve it, he said sincerely. Everyone knows you carried that project. Ariel thanked him before returning briefly to her office. For a moment she simply sat at her desk, absorbing the reality of everything that had happened. Then her thoughts drifted to Darius. Despite everything, she still wanted to share the news with him. Maybe this achievement could be a turning point for their marriage. Maybe it would remind him of the woman he once claimed to admire so much. Ariel picked up her phone, considering calling him, but decided against it. No, she wanted to tell him in person. Tonight, she would go home and share the incredible news. For once, she imagined a happy evening, a moment where he might finally look at her with pride instead of indifference. With that hopeful thought, she gathered her things and prepared to leave early. What she didn't know was that the scene waiting for her at home would shatter every illusion she still held about her marriage. The evening air was cool and calm as Ariel Monroe drove home, the city lights beginning to flicker on across Atlanta's skyline. For the first time in a very long while, her heart felt light. The promotion, the historic deal, the applause from the boardroom, everything still felt surreal. Every red light she stopped at gave her another moment to replay the day in her mind. Executive Director of Global Strategy. The word still sounded unreal. Her share from the $50 billion partnership alone was enough to change her entire life. Years of quiet determination had finally placed her among the most influential executives in the industry. Yet despite everything she had achieved that day, her first instinct had been to go home and share the news with her husband. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight Darius would finally see her. She imagined walking through the door, telling him the news, and watching his face light up with pride. Perhaps they could celebrate together. Perhaps this would be the moment when everything between them started to heal. Ariel pulled into the driveway just after sunset. The porch lights were already on, and a sleek white luxury car she didn't recognize was parked near the curb. She paused briefly, studying it. The vehicle was expensive, far more expensive than anything she or Darius owned. A small crease formed between her brows. Maybe one of Darius's business friends had come by again. She pushed the thought aside and stepped out of the car, smoothing the front of her blazer as she walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement. In her hand she held her work bag, still filled with the documents that proved she had just changed the future of her company. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. Laughter echoed from the living room. Not just one voice. 3. Ariel slowly closed the door behind her, the sound of conversation growing clearer as she walked toward the hallway. Then she stopped. Sitting comfortably on the living room couch, as if she owned the house, was a woman Ariel had never seen before, but instantly recognized from society magazines and business gossip columns. Savannah Price. Savannah came from one of the wealthiest real estate families in the Southeast. Her father owned luxury developments across several major cities, and her personal fortune was rumored to be worth hundreds of millions. She was known for glamorous charity events, exclusive parties, and a lifestyle that made headlines regularly. And right now she was sitting in Ariel's living room. Savannah wore a stunning gold satin bodycon dress that shimmered softly under the lights, hugging her tall, elegant frame perfectly. Her long honey-brown hair had been straightened and styled into luxurious layered strands that flowed smoothly over her shoulders, the ends softly curled to frame her face. Her makeup was flawless, her nails perfectly manicured, and a diamond bracelet sparkled on her wrist as she held a glass of wine. Next to her sat Darius. He looked completely relaxed, leaning back into the couch with his arm draped casually across Savannah's shoulders. He wore a fitted black designer shirt with slim gray trousers, looking more polished than Ariel had seen him in months. Across from them sat Loretta Monroe, smiling proudly as if she were hosting honored guests. She had changed into a rust-colored blouse paired with cream slacks, and her short straight bob haircut had been freshly styled with a sleek shine, giving her an air of smug satisfaction. For a moment Ariel simply stood there. Her mind struggled to process the scene in front of her. Then Darius noticed her. "Well, look who finally made it home," he said with a careless grin. Savannah turned slowly, her sharp eyes scanning Ariel from head to toe. "Oh," she said lightly. "So this is the wife." The words were spoken casually, but the disrespect in them cut deep. Ariel felt her heart drop into her stomach. "What is going on here?" she asked quietly. Darius chuckled as if the situation were amusing. "Relax," he said. "You're acting dramatic already." Loretta rolled her eyes. "I told you she would start with the attitude the moment she walked in." Savannah took a slow sip of her wine, still studying Ariel like an interesting curiosity. Darius gestured toward Savannah with a proud smile. "This is Savannah Price. She's going to be spending some time here." The words landed like a heavy stone. Ariel blinked in disbelief. "Spending time here?" she repeated. Savannah leaned forward slightly, crossing her legs gracefully. "I hope you don't mind," she said with a smooth smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Darius said the house had plenty of space. The humiliation burned in Ariel's chest. She looked at her husband. "You brought another woman into our home?" Darius shrugged. "Don't make it sound so serious." "This is serious." Ariel's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You're married." Loretta let out an irritated sigh and stood up from her chair. "There you go again," she said sharply. "Always complaining." Ariel turned toward her. "Are you really supporting this?" Loretta crossed her arms. "Savannah is a successful young woman from a powerful family. She knows how to appreciate a man like my son." The insult was deliberate. Ariel felt her hands trembling. "And what about me?" she asked quietly. Loretta gave a cold smile. You should be grateful he even stays in this house." Darius laughed, clearly enjoying the tension. Savannah giggled softly beside him. Ariel took a step forward, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "This is my home too. You cannot just—" Before she could finish her sentence, splash! Cold water struck her face with sudden force. The shock stole the rest of her words. Droplets soaked her cream blouse, darkening the delicate fabric instantly. Water dripped from her straightened hair, sliding down her cheeks and neck. Loretta lowered the empty glass slowly, her expression calm. "Know your place," she said coldly. Savannah burst into laughter. Darius leaned back, laughing loudly beside her. "Oh wow," he said between chuckles. "Look at you." Ariel stood frozen. The humiliation was overwhelming. Her clothes clung to her skin, water dripping onto the living room floor as the three of them continued laughing at her. Savannah wiped a tear of laughter from the corner of her eye. "She looks like a drenched kitten," she joked. Darius shook his head in amusement. "You should see your face right now." For several seconds, Ariel didn't move. The woman who had just secured a $50 billion deal, who had been celebrated by some of the most powerful executives in the country only hours earlier, now stood soaked and humiliated in her own home. But something inside her quietly shifted. The pain remained. The betrayal remained. Yet beneath it all, something stronger began to rise. Without saying a single word, Ariel turned and walked upstairs. Behind her, the laughter continued. She entered the bedroom and closed the door softly. Her hands trembled as she opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. One by one, she packed her clothes, her laptop, her documents, her essentials. Downstairs, the voices and laughter echoed faintly through the floor. When she finished, she wiped her face, lifted the suitcase, and walked back downstairs. The three of them were still in the living room. Savannah looked up first. "Oh," she said mockingly. "Are you leaving?" Darius smirked. "Going back to your little office job tomorrow?" Loretta shook her head dismissively. "Some women just can't handle reality." Ariel walked past them silently. The suitcase wheels rolled softly across the floor. At the door, she paused for only a moment. Darius called out lazily from the couch. "Don't worry," he said. "You'll come crawling back eventually." Savannah laughed again, but Ariel didn't respond. She stepped outside into the night air, tears finally sliding down her cheeks as she walked toward her car. None of them realized what had truly happened in that moment. They believed they had just driven away a weak, powerless woman. What they didn't know was that the woman who walked out of that house drenched and heartbroken was no longer the same person who had walked in. And soon, the world would see exactly who Ariel Monroe had become. 6 months passed. Time moved forward in ways that no one inside the Monroe house had anticipated. The woman who had walked out of that door in tears that night did not spend those months drowning in sorrow the way they imagined. Instead, Ariel Monroe quietly rebuilt her life piece by piece. And in doing so, she became someone far stronger than the woman they once mocked. Atlanta's financial district looked breathtaking from the top floor of the newly renovated Monroe Strategic Ventures building. The company occupied several levels of a sleek glass tower overlooking the heart of the city, its name displayed confidently in polished letters near the entrance lobby. Inside the top executive office, Ariel stood beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the skyline. The early morning sunlight illuminated the room, reflecting softly off the clean marble desk and modern furniture arranged with understated elegance. Everything about the space reflected control, ambition, and quiet authority. Ariel herself had changed. Her sense of style was sharper now, refined but powerful. That morning she wore a well-tailored suit that fit her frame perfectly, paired with simple diamond studs and heels that echoed steadily across the polished floor when she walked. Her hair was sleek and neatly styled into a smooth shoulder-length cut, the strands framing her face with a confidence that had not been there months earlier. The timid softness she once carried had disappeared. In its place stood a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. The events following her departure from the Monroe house had unfolded rapidly. Within weeks of closing the $50 billion partnership, Ariel's reputation had spread throughout major investment circles. Financial publications wrote about the historic deal, business podcasts discussed her strategy, and industry leaders began reaching out with partnership offers. But Ariel had chosen a different path. Instead of simply settling into her new executive role at Apex Dominion, she used her financial share and connections to establish her own investment firm, Monroe Strategic Ventures. The company focused on infrastructure, technology partnerships, and high-value development projects. Within months, it had already attracted major clients and international investors. What many competitors underestimated was Ariel's quiet determination. She knew exactly how difficult it had been to reach this level. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated. That memory fueled her focus every day. Across the office, her assistant Malik walked in carrying a tablet and several printed files. Even he had changed slightly in the months since Ariel launched the firm. His once casual demeanor had been replaced by a sharper professional confidence as he helped manage one of the fastest-growing investment companies in the region. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe," he said. Ariel turned from the window. "Morning, Malik. What do we have today?" He placed the files neatly on her desk. Several funding requests from startup firms, a logistics partnership proposal from Dallas, and 3 new infrastructure bids. Ariel scanned the documents quickly. Any of them worth serious attention? Malik hesitated for a moment before answering. "There's one application that stood out, but not necessarily for a good reason." Ariel raised an eyebrow slightly. "What do you mean?" Malik tapped his tablet, pulling up a file. The applicant is requesting emergency investment for a struggling business venture. The company claims they're developing a luxury lifestyle brand, but their financial records are chaotic. He rotated the tablet so she could see the information. The founder is asking for $10 million in funding. Ariel leaned forward slightly, glancing at the profile attached to the proposal. The moment she saw the name, her expression remained calm, but something quiet and cold flickered behind her eyes. Darius Monroe. Malik continued speaking, unaware of the personal history behind the name. The business has almost no structure, he said. Their spending is reckless, and their revenue projections don't make much sense. Honestly, it looks like someone chasing luxury branding without understanding how business actually works. Ariel leaned back in her chair slowly. For a brief moment, memories surfaced uninvited. The laughter, the water dripping down her face, the suitcase rolling across the floor as they mocked her. Then the memory faded just as quickly. Her voice remained steady. Who else is involved with the company? Malik scrolled further down the file. Looks like his mother is listed as an advisor. Ariel almost smiled. Of course she was. Malik continued reading. And interestingly, the original financial backing for the project appears to have come from someone named Savannah Price. That name brought a slightly longer pause. Savannah, the glamorous woman who had laughed while Ariel stood soaked in the living room. Malik looked up. The strange part is that the financial backing suddenly stopped 2 months ago. Since then, the company has been collapsing pretty quickly. Ariel tapped the desk lightly with one finger, thinking. So now they're looking for a bailout. Exactly, Malik said. He hesitated again before adding. Normally we'd reject something like this immediately, but they requested a formal meeting with the executive board. Ariel looked at the skyline again, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass windows. Fate had an interesting way of arranging things. Schedule the meeting, she said calmly. Malik blinked in surprise. You want to see them? Yes. He nodded and began entering the details into his tablet. They'll be surprised to get the opportunity. Ariel's expression remained unreadable. Let's see what they have to say. Malik finished scheduling the appointment before glancing up again. The meeting is set for tomorrow afternoon. Ariel nodded once. After he left the office, she remained seated for a moment in thoughtful silence. 6 months earlier, she had walked out of a house where she had been treated like nothing. Now the very people who mocked her were unknowingly requesting financial help from her company. They believed they were coming to negotiate with an investment firm. They had no idea who they would find sitting at the head of the table. Across the city, Darius Monroe spent the evening nervously reviewing business documents he barely understood. His failing company was running out of money quickly, and the opportunity to pitch their idea to Monroe Strategic Ventures felt like the last lifeline available. Loretta was equally hopeful. Once they hear our plan, she said confidently, they'll have no choice but to invest. Neither of them knew that the woman they had humiliated months earlier now owned the firm holding their future in its hands. And when the conference room doors opened the next day, they would finally come face to face with the version of Ariel Monroe they had never imagined. The conference floor of Monroe Strategic Ventures carried an atmosphere of quiet authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the corridor, allowing sunlight to spill across the polished floors and glass-walled offices. Employees moved with calm professionalism, their conversations low and focused, the environment reflecting the discipline of a company that had quickly earned respect in powerful financial circles. That afternoon, the reception area on the executive floor welcomed 3 visitors who looked far less confident than they expected to feel when they first arrived. Darius Monroe adjusted the sleeve of his designer jacket for the 3rd time while staring around the sleek lobby. The building alone made him uneasy. The architecture, the expensive furnishings, the discreet but visible security presence. Everything about the place reminded him that the firm they were meeting with operated at a level far above anything he had experienced. Beside him sat Loretta Monroe, her posture stiff as she studied the elegant space with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. She had dressed carefully for the meeting, wearing fitted slacks and a polished blouse, her straight bob styled neatly as always. She still carried the same confidence she always had, convinced that charm and persistence would secure the investment they desperately needed. Across from them sat Savannah Price. She looked very different from the glamorous woman who had once laughed in Ariel's living room. Savannah's clothing was professional and understated, and her makeup was softer than the bold style she once preferred. Her long, straight hair had been pulled back into a sleek, low ponytail, giving her a composed appearance that suggested someone who had spent the last few months doing a great deal of reflection. The silence between them was uncomfortable. Darius cleared his throat. "Relax," he muttered. "All we have to do is convince them the brand has potential." Loretta nodded confidently. "Exactly. Investors love luxury lifestyle businesses." Savannah said nothing. Her eyes moved slowly across the company logo displayed on the far wall. Monroe Strategic Ventures. She had noticed the name the moment they arrived. At first she assumed it was simply coincidence, but something about it had unsettled her. The receptionist spoke gently from behind the desk. "Mr. Monroe?" Darius stood immediately. "Yes. The executive board is ready to see you now." She gestured politely toward the hallway. "Please follow me." They walked through the corridor together, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. As they approached the large conference room doors, Darius straightened his jacket again, preparing himself to present the business plan he hoped would save his failing venture. The receptionist pushed the doors open. "Mr. Monroe and associates have arrived." Darius stepped inside confidently. Then he stopped. For a moment his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. At the far end of the long conference table sat a group of executives reviewing documents. The room itself was spacious and modern, with large windows offering a sweeping view of the city skyline. But none of that mattered, because sitting at the head of the table was Ariel Monroe. She looked calm and completely composed as she reviewed a file in front of her. Her posture was relaxed yet authoritative, the quiet confidence in her expression making it clear that she belonged exactly where she was. Her hair was styled neatly, framing her face with effortless elegance. The tailored outfit she wore carried the subtle authority of someone used to leading powerful conversations. When she finally lifted her eyes, her gaze settled on the three figures standing in the doorway. The silence that followed was almost heavy. Darius stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. Ariel?" Loretta blinked several times in confusion. "What are you doing here?" Savannah's reaction was different. The moment she recognized Ariel, her shoulders stiffened slightly. Unlike the others, she immediately understood what had happened. Ariel closed the file calmly and folded her hands on the table. "Please," she said evenly. "Have a seat." The authority in her voice left little room for argument. Darius and Loretta slowly moved toward the chairs, their earlier confidence completely gone. Savannah followed quietly, her expression thoughtful. Malik sat along the side of the table, watching the scene with professional composure. Once everyone was seated, Ariel glanced down briefly at the document in front of her. "Mr. Monroe," she said calmly, "your company has submitted a request for investment funding." Darius still looked stunned. "You work here?" Ariel's gaze remained steady. "I own the firm." The words landed like a shockwave. Loretta's mouth opened slightly in disbelief. "What?" Darius leaned forward in confusion. "That doesn't make any sense. You worked at Apex Dominion." "I did," Ariel replied, "before launching Monroe Strategic Ventures." The realization slowly began settling over the room. Darius's expression shifted from confusion to uneasy understanding. The name of the company, the wealth, the executive authority, all of it suddenly connected. You're serious?" he asked. Ariel said nothing for a moment. Instead, she tapped the file lightly. "Your business proposal." Her tone remained professional. "Unfortunately, the financial projections show significant instability. Excessive spending, poor revenue structure, and a lack of long-term strategy." Darius struggled to regain his composure. "Well, that's why we're seeking investors. With proper funding, we can stabilize the company." Ariel leaned back slightly in her chair. "And the $10 million you requested would solve those issues?" Darius nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely." Before Ariel could respond, Savannah suddenly spoke. "No." Everyone turned toward her. Darius frowned. "What are you doing?" Savannah looked directly at Ariel. "I owe you an apology." The room grew quiet again. Darius shook his head. "Savannah." She cut him off firmly. "No. I'm done pretending. Her voice carried none of the playful arrogance she once displayed. I didn't know the truth when we met, she said to Ariel. He told me he was practically separated. I didn't know how cruel things had become in your home. Loretta scoffed loudly. Oh, please. Savannah turned sharply toward her. You humiliated her. Loretta fell silent. Savannah continued, her voice steady. And you, she said to Darius, used me to fund your lifestyle. Darius's face tightened with frustration. That's not. Yes, it is. Savannah turned back to Ariel. When I finally understood the situation, I stopped financing his business. Ariel nodded slightly. That explains the financial collapse. Savannah gave a small, regretful smile. I suppose it does. The room remained silent for several seconds. Finally, Ariel closed the file. Based on the information presented, she said calmly, Monroe Strategic Ventures will not be investing in this project. Darius's shoulders dropped. Loretta looked furious. But Savannah simply nodded, as if she expected that answer all along. As the meeting ended, one truth had become painfully clear to everyone in the room. The woman they once mocked and humiliated was now the one holding power over their future. And the Ariel sitting at the head of that table was no longer someone they could control, intimidate, or disrespect ever again. The meeting ended in a silence that felt heavier than any argument. For several seconds after Ariel announced the decision, no one moved. The air in the conference room carried a quiet finality that made it clear the conversation was over. The executives beside Ariel began gathering their documents, while Malik calmly closed his tablet. Across the table, Darius sat frozen. Only now was the full weight of the situation sinking in. The woman he had once laughed at, the woman he had watched leave the house soaked and humiliated, was now sitting at the head of a powerful investment firm, calmly deciding whether his future business would survive. And she had just refused. Loretta was the first to break the silence. This is ridiculous, she snapped, pushing her chair back slightly. You're really going to sabotage your own husband? Ariel looked at her calmly. Former husband, she corrected. Loretta frowned. What are you talking about? I filed for divorce 2 months ago, Ariel replied evenly. You should be receiving the legal notice soon. Darius stared at her in shock. You what? Her voice remained composed, almost distant. The paperwork is already in progress. For the first time since entering the room, Darius looked genuinely shaken. You can't be serious, he said quietly. Ariel closed the folder in front of her. I am. Loretta's voice rose with anger. After everything my son gave you, this is how you repay him? Malik raised an eyebrow slightly, but remained silent. Ariel slowly stood from her chair. The simple movement instantly shifted the energy of the room. She was no longer just a woman answering questions at a table. She was the one in charge of the entire space. What exactly did he give me? She asked calmly. Loretta opened her mouth, but no answer came. Ariel continued. Disrespect. Betrayal. Public humiliation. Her voice never became loud, yet every word carried quiet strength. You poured water on me in my own home. Loretta shifted uncomfortably. You laughed while your son brought another woman into the house I helped pay for. Darius lowered his eyes. And when I left that night, Ariel said softly, you both sat there and laughed. The memory hung in the air like an echo. Savannah remained silent throughout the exchange, watching Ariel with a mixture of admiration and regret. Darius finally stood up. Ariel, listen, he said carefully. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. She looked at him for a moment. For years she had once loved the man standing in front of her. She had defended him, believed in him, and sacrificed her own peace hoping their marriage would grow stronger. But now she saw him clearly. Not as the man she once loved, but simply as someone who had taken her loyalty for granted. There is nothing left to fix, she said. Darius stepped closer to the table. You're just angry right now. Once you calm down. I'm not angry. Her answer stopped him. Her voice was steady. I'm finished. The difference between those two things was something Darius clearly didn't understand. Loretta suddenly softened her tone, attempting a different approach. Ariel, your family, she said, forcing a smile. Families go through problems. You don't destroy everything over one misunderstanding. Ariel almost laughed. One misunderstanding? Loretta hesitated. You humiliated me for years, Ariel said quietly. You treated me like I was worthless in my own home. She picked up her folder and placed it neatly on the table. But the night I walked out of that house, you gave me something valuable. Darius frowned slightly. What? Ariel met his eyes. The freedom to finally stop pretending. The room went silent again. She turned toward Malik. Please have security escort our guests out. Malik nodded immediately and stepped toward the door. 2 security officers entered moments later. Darius looked stunned. You're throwing us out? Ariel didn't respond. Loretta muttered angrily under her breath as she gathered her purse. Darius lingered for a moment longer, staring at Ariel as if hoping she would suddenly change her mind. But her expression never wavered. Savannah stood last. Before leaving, she paused beside the table. Ariel, she said quietly. Ariel looked at her. I'm truly sorry for my part in everything, Savannah said sincerely. You didn't deserve any of it. Ariel studied her for a moment before nodding slightly. Take care of yourself, Savannah. Savannah gave a small, respectful nod before following the others out. Within seconds, the conference room was quiet again. The doors closed softly behind them. Malik returned to the table, shaking his head slightly. Well, he said, that was intense. Ariel allowed a small smile to appear. Business can be like that sometimes. He studied her for a moment. You handled it well. She glanced toward the window where the city stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sunlight. 6 months earlier, she had walked out of a house feeling small, humiliated, and broken. Now she stood at the center of a life she had built entirely on her own strength. Malik gathered the remaining documents. Your next meeting starts in 20 minutes. Ariel nodded. I'll be there. As he left the room, she remained near the window for a brief moment longer. Down below, the busy streets of the city moved constantly with people chasing opportunities, building futures, and starting over when life forced them to. Ariel watched the skyline quietly. The past no longer held power over her. The woman who once endured disrespect for the sake of love was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understood her own worth. And as she turned away from the window and walked toward her next meeting, one thing was certain. No matter how many times Darius or Loretta looked back at the past, hoping for another chance, the woman they once took for granted was already far beyond their reach. Finally, we have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.